Hello, I'm David Kain of Kain Automotive, and I am really excited about my interview today because I get to interview a friend of mine who happens to be the Chief Content Officer of Automotive News. His name is Jamie Butters, and he's one of the rare automotive journalists that actually did time working at the Herald Leader in Lexington, Kentucky. And I would bet if you look at the resume of most automotive journalists, they only wish they worked at the Herald Leader. And now, Jamie, you get to do that. So, Jamie, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we're going to talk about some interesting things in automotive journalism. So please share with us who you are.
Sure. Well, yeah, I took kind of a backwards route into auto journalism. I was kind of torn. My dad was a journalist. He was a broadcast journalist, TV and radio. So I spent a lot of time hanging around newsrooms as a kid. I was kind of torn between business and journalism as a student. And I ended up going with journalism. I loved working at the University of Iowa in my hometown, Iowa City. I loved working at the radio station and the newspaper. I loved it so much, I kind of enjoyed doing that more than going to classes. So I quit school for a while, got a job at the Cedar Rapids Gazette, where I met a lovely woman who got a job in Lexington, Kentucky. And after some negotiating with her, I moved down there and got a job and got my degree in finance from the University of Kentucky, but always with the aim of continuing in journalism and almost like learning a foreign language, to learn the language of CFOs so I could take that into journalism and tell stories. I did it, of course, the woman I followed to Kentucky is my wife. We've been married for many years now, 20 some years, and we have three daughters. Everything worked out. So I was there for several years and started covering Toyota and going to some auto shows. Toyota really taught me a lot about the industry. They were just coming out with the Prius hybrid when I started there. So I got to go to Japan and learn all about Toyota's culture and, and what they were doing with technology. And that kind of put me on the radar of the Detroit media, the Detroit based auto journalists. And then after a couple of years, the Free Press called me up and brought me to Detroit. I worked there for about 7 years. Took a year off in between to study China and its economy at the University of Michigan as a Knight Wallace Fellow. So I was basically there for the George W. Bush years. I spent the Barack Obama years at Bloomberg News running their auto coverage. And then 2 years ago, I came to Automotive News as Chief Content Officer, and it's been great to be here. I've really enjoyed all the places I've worked, and it's great to serve this industry.
I would imagine. So, Jamie, let's talk about how broad of influence automotive journalism is, and what you feel like the relevance is to the general population, because as a lot of people may or may not know, I know the listeners to this broadcast will know, is automotive has a huge influence on the economy, is influenced in a lot of the feeder plants that are out in small towns all over America. I know right across from our dealership in the Lexington, Kentucky market, we had United Oil and Glass that supplied the glass to Toyota and other manufacturers. There was also another plant that supplied some of the cooling mechanisms that went in to cool the cars and stuff. So that's happening all over the world. And Automotive News, and I'm trusting each of your stops, really, when it came to automotive, it wasn't like the arts, and it wasn't like the food, and it wasn't like the civics or the other headline grabbing news. But why automotive journalism, and what do you feel like its vital role is beyond just automotive participants?
Right. So for me, I got into it because I really did like the world. I was very interested in the world of business and the behavior of markets, but also, of course, the kind of the marketplace of ideas, right, in journalism. And the auto industry quickly became a compelling story for me because it's so multifaceted, right? A few years ago, I was when I was still at Bloomberg, I was walking in the hall and I saw a colleague from the Wall Street Journal, and who was down in the dumps and just feeling depressed. Felt like she was writing the same stories over and over again. I said, "Well, you need to quit doing that. Like, there's too many interesting stuff. If you're writing sales stories, all the time, write about earnings. If you're writing just those business things, you write about the fashion, write about design, write about marketing, get to know somebody, write a
Yes.
person. There are all these great personalities, whether they're in HR or purchasing or whatever. There are just so many interesting people. You got corporate finance and personal finance, and just so I can go on and on. But I mean, there are so many elements to it. It should never get boring for us as journalists. And of course, because if it's boring for us, it's going to be boring for the readers. Uh, so I do feel like there are a lot of people in journalism who aren't comfortable with business or math even. And so it's an opportunity for me to step in, because we know, whether it was in the 90s when I was coming into journalism, a lot of people were getting into investing who had never done it before, and
Yeah.
they wanted information to know what should they think about the economy and the stock market. And then you get, each part of what is, I think, a really important thing that I'm sure your readers know, or your listeners know on some level, but just to really dive in a little, each publication has its own audience, right?
Mhm.
And the people, we know that as the journalists, and of course our sources know that too. So when I'm dealing with a company like General Motors or Ford, when they wanted to talk to their customers, right, then they like to go to the mainstream press, the general interest press, especially something like USA Today.
Yeah.
But when they want to talk to their employees, they'll often go to the Detroit Free Press or the Detroit News. They want to reach people. They want to gain the credibility of having that message filtered by professional journalists who have the trust of the audience. But if they're trying to reach their employees, they go there. If they're trying to reach investors, they go to Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or maybe Reuters. And when they want to talk to dealers or within the industry, they really come to Automotive News, because
Yeah.
we have such a large team and we cover it so thoroughly. We cover suppliers and automakers. We have a lot of readers from those types of companies too, but nobody else really who has our type of reporting has our type of relationship with dealers. So our responsibility to covering retail and to covering dealers and their world is a little extra, and it's really core to our identity. And that's a different audience for me to serve as a journalist than I did at Bloomberg or the Free Press or the Herald Leader. But it's still it's still a great industry, and it's great to serve people. It's a different kind of community, right?
Mhm.
When I was at the Cedar Rapids Gazette, we had a little sister town called Marion that's about 30 to 50,000 people. And I often think of our auto industry as like Marion, Iowa, spread out across North America. We've got, 30 to 50,000 people who all speak the same language, who are all grappling with the same problems. And some of them are against each other because they're rivals at the same level, or because they have different levels. And, and we just try to help everybody say their piece, try to get, some common facts on the record so that everyone can grapple with what they're really dealing with, and try to move forward.
You bet. Well, so as you were going through that, what was popping in my mind is making the cover of Automotive News is equivalent to the cover of Rolling Stone, right? So if you're in the music industry, but if you're in automotive, truly there is a lot of cachet that comes with that. And I would assume, as Jason and you were talking about you coming in as chief content officer, I would imagine you got the story of, now, Jamie, when you come in here, this is the Automotive News, so we need you to take it up. And tell us a little bit about the responsibility of a chief content officer, because I would just be curious, because you're not just the printed word, but you're the digital word. When you're sitting in the studio of your morning news broadcast, and so it's not quite what it used to be when I was at the Eastern Progress student newspaper, where we would write the articles and we'd lay them out and we'd take the glue and put them all down and then
Those
go
were
to
the
the
days.
press.
Yeah.
those really were great days.
Yeah, I had a good understanding of Automotive News and what it was about,
Yeah.
before I even started talking to Jason and Casey about this job. But because they just do such a tremendous job, I don't want to keep just bragging up on my company. But yeah, so chief content officer, because I had such a long print background, and then had done really 9 years of digital work. When Bloomberg also bought Business Week, so I still had some, hand in the magazine a little bit. But I had really become very much a digital person. So yeah, now in my current role, I'm over all the reporting teams and over the web production and the print production. I do have Dave Versicle is the one newsroom person above me. He was also my predecessor at Bloomberg, because it's a kind of a small world. But he is also then over Automotive News Canada and Automotive News TV, which has really helped me to focus on sort of the core product while I'm still getting up to speed. It was easy to step in because I was familiar with the subject matter and familiar with a lot of the people at Automotive News, but it's a different cycle. It's a different newsroom. And so, like I said, I've been here 2 years now, and the second year has gone, so much better. I just feel, so much more confident, telling people what to do and setting priorities and telling people what they don't have to do. Because especially during COVID, we've all had to be very flexible as managers. And sometimes you have to choose not to do stuff, and you have to give people the liberty to let some things go.
I bet. Well, so I'll use your own words. You're one of the few people that has said my second year talking about 2020 has been so good. And I'm sure you're like, oh my God, did I really just describe it? And the truth of it is, automotive, particularly automotive retail, has, to some odd result, had a fabulous year in 2020, and that in and of itself is kind of an interesting story. So let's switch gears just a little bit. Pen to pad, you're sitting across from somebody interesting or colorful. Who have you enjoyed interviewing? Who's been an interesting story that you've written about?
I mean, there's almost never a better interview than Bob Lutz, right?
Really?
Because
Yeah.
he loves to tell stories. Well, because he says things,
Yeah.
right? And like one of his famous sayings is often wrong, never in doubt.
Yeah.
So whatever he's thinking at the time, he will tell you. And
Oh, yeah.
So he's always entertaining. A lot of times things don't work out the way he says, but he's always a great storyteller, and great just to dig into his mind, because he has so much experience and such a depth of knowledge. And I remember when I was a young reporter, when I was new into the Free Press, shortly after I got here, he came back to GM. He came to GM, came back into working for an automaker, and I just sat down and I asked him, how do you approach a car? How do you look at one? How do you judge it? Because you're the best at it. And so he gave a great detailed explanation, about the value of the exterior as sort of the attractive, superficial but very important part, and then the role of the interior. And he was very entertaining and colorful, and always good. I think he had just come to the company, and we were in Japan, and Rick Wagner was there with he was the chairman and CEO at the time, and he was there with all of their Japanese partners, and they were all sitting up there, big giant room with everybody seated in a big square. And there was Bob just to the right of them all, drawing. And I was like, what were you sketching out? He's like, well, thinking about that look for Cadillac. Like, I'm not sure. So he was just sitting up there doodling away in the middle of.
I would imagine he didn't design the Aztec.
No, he sure did not. He sure did not.
So,
but I'll tell you the opposite end of the spectrum, right, is somebody like Alan Mullally, who is just so, which, what made him a great leader made him a terrible interview. He was just relentlessly upbeat, and he never deviated from his 5 talking points, what they were about. Mm-hmm. And he told me the story. He loved the story about how the Taurus came to be. That Ford made this special team, and they shipped them out to Seattle. He got to know some of those guys when they were working on it, and they were trying to make a car that could beat the Camry and the Accord, put America back on top as the maker of family sedans. And they were working on this car, but they couldn't figure out what to call it. And he said, then one day, he said the 2 main guys leading the team realized both of their wives had summer birthdays, and they were both born under the sign of Taurus, and they thought that would be nice. He said, isn't that neat? And I said, well, Alan, it's a really good thing they weren't born under the sign of Cancer, because the Ford Cancer would be a terrible name for a car. And he said, only you would think of that. One time I got him to break out of his character, but even then he just, scolded me quickly and went back to making his points.
I would imagine. So what's interesting about you all is you cover the whole gamut. You go worldwide. You talk about international influencers, and you've seen some of the, I guess, Carlos Ghosns of the world, and those kind of stories that are the stories beyond the stories, and what's happening there. How much does the mystique of that, like the Ford versus Ferrari, the stories behind the stories, the private room discussions, the late night recruiting or thinking whether or not a product is going to make it, how much of that do you wish you all could talk about, but you're in such a fact headline driving business, or is that just for when you write your novel?
Well, there's layers to all of it, right? There's a lot of that inside backroom drama that we just wish we knew more, right? Sometimes,
yeah.
And sometimes we hear those stories, but we can't use them,
Yes.
and because we'd be making somebody vulnerable, somebody who told us something in trust, in confidence, and we have to be careful. Then, sometimes they are right out there, and they always add, and part of the reason these stories get told over and over again is because they're so compelling. There's so much drama to them. When Bob Lutz says that Renault would be better off to take $6 billion and just bury it in and sink it in the Pacific rather than go bail out Nissan, that's a bold statement, and it gives us something to measure against, for all the 22 years since. I think the rivalry, it was never spoken, but the rivalry between Carlos Ghosn and Sergio Marchionne was just palpable. And they were so similar in their roles and their structures. They both were running two automakers and a sort of nebulous in-between company that managed the relationship between the two. But then their styles are so different, right? Sergio, rest in peace, he would be in his sweater, sometimes his untucked shirt, falling out underneath, if he was still smoking, he'd reek of cigarettes, and he'd, stayed up late nights, playing poker, and, just this sort of, they were like, remember The Odd Couple, Oscar Madison and Walter Matthau, or, Oscar Madison and Felix Unger, right? And so he was like this Oscar Madison character, and then Carlos Ghosn, was just like he was ironed, just not a wrinkle anywhere on him. The man was creased from the tip of his hair down to his shiny shoes. And they just stylistically could not be any different, but their egos were huge, their capacities were huge, and their desire to work, they just were just relentless, year after year, longer than you would think anybody could keep it up. They were so similar, and I really don't think they liked each other.
Yeah, it's probably true. And of course that brings up some of the struggles that Bill Ford had to go through as he was ascending in leadership, and what goes on over there at the Glass House. I mean, it's always full of intrigue, and yet you read the good news that earnings are up, and some of the auto industry challenges are never going to go away. The growth of Tesla, you see Carvana coming into automotive retail and digital retailing. I mean, you all have so much to cover. What goes through your all's mind when you go to print? Because everybody's sitting there going, run my story, this is a winner.
Yeah. I wrote on the whiteboard by my desk, I wrote three giant words: making, selling, and thinking. And that's really what I try to have a mix on our front page every week. I want something about selling because there's so much happening there, and dealers are an important part of our audience. Something about making, whether it's design or something from the factory, manufacturing processes, or just an automaker type issue, but not in a standard, something you already read last week.
Yeah.
And then something about thinking, that's just sort of, what's innovative, who's disrupting what are the new ideas, how far are we away from EVs reaching cost parity or fuel cells being relevant to people? Something that isn't part of your everyday, wouldn't necessarily be part of your everyday, but just some interesting idea that someone on the staff found or came up with, and try to offer that up. So that's a big part of what I try to think about.
I love that, making, selling, and thinking. So that takes me back to when Martha Lane Collins closed the Georgetown Toyota plant, and
close the deal to open it, you mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And as I imagine it, so the making was, they wanted to make Toyotas somewhere, and ultimately the dealers wanted to sell Toyotas, and she's sitting there thinking, how can I close these guys? And from what the word on the street was, she made chocolate chip cookies and took them to the meeting, and nothing like the thinking out of the box to really put the bow on the package, and obviously that worked. And the influence of women in automotive is remarkable. I mean, we seldom see the story of when the governor of Kentucky, Martha Lane Collins at the time, did bring in that plant, and it changed the dynamics of Lexington and Georgetown and all of that for forever. And then you see Mary Barra and what she's doing with General Motors, and some of the stories that come there. You all have been a champion for several years on women in automotive. Let's talk just a little bit about how that plays in the old smoky rooms of Detroit and such.
Yeah, it is something that's been an important mission of Automotive News, and we have coming up our 5th list of the 100 leading women in the auto industry. We do it only every 5 years. It's a really big deal. And, we're a little bit torn. I think we would like to think that it's at some point we won't have to do that,
Yeah.
that there would be some enough sense of gender equity that isn't really the case. But in the same way that Barack Obama becoming president didn't change everything for Black people in America, Mary Barra becoming CEO of General Motors does not change things for all women in the auto industry.
Yes.
So there's a lot of change and a lot of progress that's going on. And Mary's another one. I interviewed her a lot around right before and during when she became CEO. We spent a lot of time with her, and it was hard to get her to talk about gender. She really didn't want to talk about being a woman as the head of product development, and potentially being a woman as a CEO of an automaker. And it was a challenge, for us journalistically. I mean, finally we kind of kept at her enough to get her to draw her out, to say, look, we're all parents, or we're all in families. And whether we're moms or we're dads or we're partners of somebody, we all have obligations outside the home and inside the home. And, employers and managers just kind of need to have some understanding about that and some flexibility. And there is progress being made, but it's, it's one of those life challenges. It's one of those things that we deal with in society in the big picture, in all industries and all across the board. And, so automotive, whether you're looking at the executive roles, and another one I would really point out is somebody like Mary Nichols out in California, who was instrumental in bringing the VW Dieselgate to fruition.
Wow.
There have been a lot of these strong women, but we also know there are a lot of women who still struggle in the workplace, and to find their way and be able to manage their life and their work.
Yeah, no question. It's interesting. When I first started going up to work on the Ford Direct project, when I was operating our dealership, they gave me a desk to work on, and it happened to be a woman who was on maternity leave, who was working at Ford's Consumer Connect division. And I asked the guy who put me there, I said, whose desk is this? And they said, it's Elena Ford's. but she's on maternity leave, so it won't matter. And so I thought that was kind of cool. And I got to know her, and we became friends during that time when we were raising Ford Direct from an idea to an actual thing. And now as things evolve, she now joined the board of Ford Direct. So it's really kind of cool 20 years later how stories like that tend to grow on their own. But are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share? Just the role of automotive journalism and what you personally feel like is vital for us to keep thinking about as we go forward. And we're chasing the clicks and so much journalism. Why does it matter to you?
Yeah, well, look, to me, and like I said, I grew up in a family of journalists and teachers, and so to me, the role of journalism is to give people the information and the context that they need to make good decisions in their lives, right? And so specifically then to business journalism is to help people get the information they need to make good decisions in their business life.
Yes.
And we know how difficult this industry is, and how many challenging, you know, I hate to you keep using the word disruptive, but you know, how many things are disrupting it? You know, this industry is not at all the same industry I started covering 20 years ago, or that you started working in at your dad's store back in the day.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's changed so much, and it keeps changing. And that's fine. It is what it is, right? But what people have to know is how to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
What's real and what's not, and what might it mean. And, you know, it's not that I have all the answers, but I have, and my team has the opportunity to ask a lot of people for their input and try to distill, you know, the best things that will help everyone, you know, like I said, come to a common set of facts and try to have some understanding of where it's going, or at least what the different theories are on where things are going. So then you can decide, well, am I going to be a dealer who's going to consolidate, who's going to, you know, even while things look dark in May, I'm going to go looking to, you know, grow and get big enough to support a digital infrastructure? Or I'm like, geez, you know, maybe I need 20 or 50 or 100 stores to get big enough to pass my business down to the next generation. And maybe now's a really good time to sell because prices are real high. You know, people have to, everyone knows that this is what we believe, you know, in capitalism, in democracy, everybody has their own ability to think for themselves and to make their own decisions and to live with their consequences. And our role is to try to give you the information to help you. And, you know, I think there are some other things I always think about. You know, I always tell my team, or when I'm, you know, taking on a new team or bringing in a new person, like, you have to be like a beat cop. You have to be like a watchdog. You have to be like an analyst, stock analyst, to understand what is going on. And then you have to be a storyteller. You have to be able to draw people in and make them want to keep reading so that they can keep learning. And so they hopefully will then also keep subscribing.
Absolutely.
So, I could go on and on, man. I love talking about business journalism and the auto industry. It's absolutely my passion, and glad to talk about it anytime.
Well, hey, thanks for doing the role reversal, and let's both send out some positive vibes that the Kentucky Wildcats get to participate in a March Madness in 2021, and the start of basketball season here this month really takes off. So
I sure hope that.
Great.
Yeah, I sure hope that after the doctors and nurses and cops and bus drivers and teachers, that we can put NCAA basketball players right next in those in line for getting the vaccines.
Absolutely. Well, Jamie, thank you very much. And thank you all very much as an audience for this interesting interview with Jamie Butters, the Chief Content Officer of Automotive News. And I hope to see you next time. Bye now.